has a mic.
So time's up for personal reflection. Should I give another minute? Oh, 2 minutes? We're bargaining. This is why I should not have been. Okay, 1 minute. 1 minute to finish up the personal reflection. All right? We're only being flexible because it's the first time. I'm good. Nice to see you. All right. Now we'll have half an hour for group work. So as I said, agree in a group of 3 or 4, depending on the size of the table. What is the best idea you want to put forward to the rest of the table? I would say maybe take 10 minutes for that. If we all agree, I can give a signal when 10 minutes are over. And then spend another maybe, or 15, and then let's agree on, and then agree on one idea you want to present at the end of the session. So at 2 o'clock. We're going to do the presentations at exactly 2 o'clock, half an hour. I'll give signals when it's like 15 minutes, 10 minutes. We're going to do this very precisely. All right? All right, perfect. Yes. right. So there's 15 minutes left. Discuss at the, now would be a good point to discuss at the table to agree how we're going to go forward. Açabilir misiniz lütfen?
Şu an açık olması lazım. Hanımefendiye verirsen. Açtın mı? Açtıktan sonra şunu bir kere basıyorum. Buyurun.
5 more minutes. 5 more minutes till presentation. 5 more minutes till presentation.
Tamam, bu da açık.
So, how many groups are ready? How many groups are ready to present the best idea forward? How many groups are ready? Nobody? Okay. All right. 5 more minutes to agree, each group, on the best idea forward, because I don't think anybody is ready. Is anybody ready? No, no, no. Five more minutes. Ruthless. All right. Nothing like organized and precise innovation. So, have you guys agreed on an idea? No? All right. So we have the first group ready to go. You know, we thought Next Gen Gov, we're going to start by building consensus. I mean, it's... Maybe they're all... Is your group ready? Is your group ready? All right. We have the first group ready to go. Just the sooner you build consensus, the quicker we get to lunch. All right, I think we're ready to roll. The first group ready to go? Who's going to present? 2 minutes.
What's the format? Just to present?
Just present what was your best
Yeah. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Armen Sarkisyan and I come from Armenia. Our group is represented by professionals from Montenegro, Kosovo, Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Botswana. So our original idea is to create a fact-checking mechanism on violations of ceasefire on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. After the ceasefire in 1994, there is no peace, but there is a ceasefire, and there are a lot of violations on the border. And the original idea is to use modern technology to investigate the cases of violations of ceasefire. For this reason, we want to use satellite data and digital map data, and then to investigate the authenticity of pictures and videos that are posted on these cases, and to cooperate with existing conflict fact-checking platforms which already exist on Syria or on Russian-Ukrainian war. And this investigation will be done mostly not on government sources, which usually are propaganda on these violations of ceasefire, but on ordinary people who live in the borders and who first suffer from these violations. And this data is going to be used or to be offered to the, first of all, to the OSCE Minsk group, which currently handles the conflict solution on Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and also for other international organizations acting in this field. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to this table, so we're going to do this a little bit randomly.
Okay, somehow we wanted actually to take one of the techniques that we've seen represented and take it completely out of context. This forensic architecture technique that we've seen, and see if we could use it, in fact, as an instrument to visualize how a development context can be and how it could become. So we took it away from the context of conflict here, and we take it from to a development situation where no conflict exists normally. Maybe let's say, just to understand it, you see, for example, how a sustainable city or a smart city project could look at the beginning, and how you could project it and show through this visualization, and it could look at the end. We would use this as a mechanism to bring, to make understand everyone what we want to do, particularly our partners, our donors. And it starts, I think, with our frustration with the verbosity that we have in describing things in many, many pages and in many, many theories. But what if we could really get similar techniques to help us show what we want to do in our work? So that's the idea we had.
Great. Wonderful. I'm gonna go to this group. Who is presenting? Maybe just quickly your name?
Yeah, I'm Georgi from UNDP Georgia. So actually we had several pieces of ideas, but then in the end we sort of combined and then like each, I think in our final idea, so it consists of several ideas, and I'll try to summarize it. Colleagues might help.
That's
So
cheating.
usually our programmatic activities and programmatic interventions are evidence-based and needs-based. But then the question is how we define what is real evidence and what are the real needs. So instead of looking into conventional and traditional data and figures like reports of governments, reports of international organizations, or reports of experts who are coming for 3 months and then leaving, and then their conclusions are becoming like, like religious documents or whatever. So we thought maybe we look into those pieces of evidence and data from innovative angle, and to have a comprehensive approach and to look into the perceptions. And then we thought about the projects and project like micro-narratives to see what the people, I mean themselves, and what those potential beneficiaries think, what are their needs and problems. And then we also came to the conclusion that sometimes the perceptions cannot be right. They may have a certain perception, but then fact can be the different. Yeah. Then we discussed this perception of security. So you might have one perception, but then real statistics can be different. So that's why we wanted to check the perceptions against real facts, statistics, and then plus we wanted to also to have multiple stakeholder engagement as well. So to horizontal and vertical, and then to have a say of all the layers from the society there, to use the platforms and also to have this, to have it more inclusive, I mean, approach here. So that's a bit like sort of the idea, which I think needs much more polishing. But again, so in 2 words, so to define evidence and need in a different way than the traditional definition.
Great, yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Who's presenting here?
Hello, my name is Jos Delahaye. I'm with the UNDP in the regional hub of Amman. So we were looking into the challenge of evidence-based policy making. And so we were looking a little bit on that and trying to link that into prevention and the possibility of it as a prevention mechanism as well, by addressing maybe or visualizing maybe risks, visualizing the political violence that might be in societies, maybe building on what you guys were saying as well, using these kind of data, and then how can you project that and help then governments doing better kind of policy making that is evidence-based. And particularly where the prevention element then would come in is really to enable to discuss the risks that the country is going into, but also to take away the blinders, because it's particularly when there is political violence that there's also less space to discuss it. So that was also a bit of the challenge that we wanted to tackle. I think that's what we discussed, no?
Right. So we'll hand it over here.
So we've just spent the last 15 minutes trying to draw lots as to who would decipher what we've been discussing, and I was the one who got the short straw, it seems. We struggled a bit with this, to be honest. I think we had a very interesting discussion around how do you apply some of these approaches and some of the creativity that is inherent in using big data and using the sort of investigative approaches that the Forensic Architects project showed. How do you apply that in very low-tech societies where digital penetration is very narrow, and you don't have the access to information in the same way, and you're dealing with governments that are able to switch off data as and when they choose. And so one of the I think we reflected on two particular issues without necessarily coming up with a specific idea. One was around the sorts of narratives that are quite prevalent in societies that are ridden by conflict, and how can access to different sources of information help those societies perhaps generate alternative narratives. We were conscious that a lot of work has been done to present counter-narratives, but that counter-narratives can actually often be counterproductive, and there's a lot of research in that. So there was a question about what sort of alternative narratives that are perhaps more positive rather than a sort of critical negative perspective. How can those be harnessed? And we also then tried to turn this to a reflection on some of the challenges of identifying the risk factors in societies that can generate violence and that can generate conflict. And clearly a lot of work has been done over many years around the early warning, the early response, the early action chain, and how can access to different sorts of data stimulate a response that enables the people who are affected to become the subjects of this process and actually be the ones who drive different forms of analysis rather than just have them being subject to the external activities and external practices of big institutions. So I think it's trying to connect. Where we were grappling with was how do you connect the reflection on different narratives to reflection on how you turn this into action and not just use. I like the way you referred to the religious documents that consultants produce, but I think often we come up with jargony terms, and early warning is one of them, where you think, oh well, we'll just sort of
Early warn.
Well, no, we'll imbue with this term with some mystical value that it'll be able to solve the problem. And actually, one of the things that needs to happen, and this perhaps is where I can tie it back to what we saw from Forensic Architects, is you really need to deconstruct in the minutiae what's really happening and not make assumptions about what is happening. And I think that's where we were really grappling. How do you get away from those assumptions?
Wonderful. Round of applause. Is this table ready? Shall we?
Hi. So we had very long and complex discussions as well, involving pretty much all of society everywhere. So forgive us if we're not always as concise as in the solution. So we talked quite a lot about cities. We talked quite a lot about whether or not citizens should become more active actors in their own in decision making. The examples of participatory budgeting were mentioned as well. We also talked quite a bit about social media and about fake news and about how to improve things on that and where to go with that. And so the most concrete thing we've come to in wide-ranging discussions is to work a lot more on media literacy for citizens, but also to put citizens much more in the position of being actors in the change and in the experience around their own lives, and making sure that not only do they get to take part in the decisions within governments to an extent, and this is already happening in many places, but also they get to be actors amongst each other, and practice community then came up, amongst each other to tackle the experience that they live in and to also connect that to more global changes. Because in many of the global changes and in many of the phenomena we see, actually national governments or local governments are behind the facts or are very much catching up and very much only one element of the greater story. So how do you, from immigration in Italy to violence in London or in Brussels to fake news, how do you make sure citizens become the practice community to take that somewhere and are truth makers rather than truth takers? And so hand over to for the second part now.
Oh.
You're
cheating a little bit as well.
But we wanted to sort of give one concrete example of how these things can play out in the programming that we do. So the idea essentially is addressing issues of disconnect between individuals, the lack of dialogue between communities, among communities, the lack of discussion between public and their leaders, and politicians making decisions in sort of a vacuum or informed by small groups of lobbyists or elites. And what we do all the time, which is community development, in bringing in to this sort of the gap between the top and the bottom. The biggest innovation of our generation, which is social media. These are free platforms. Bring that somehow structurally, systemically into the development work that we do. So use it. I don't want to use the platform because it seems to already be becoming a bad word, but essentially sort of a mechanism of discussion where the individuals can have a say in what they're doing. This goes a little bit to budgetary planning that we already do in many villages, you know. I remember in Bangladesh we were doing this, but this is introducing social media and this new mechanism of engagement to that process. And around the table we also had a discussion on why we do not participate in our own discussions within UNDP, you know, our future and all of that. And there are town hall meetings, but many of us don't participate. So if we can introduce sort of a social media angle, we thought that we would be a lot more prone to participate. We would be, you know, we'd be in our car, we would send a little suggestion or a little comment. It would be much easier than us sitting in a meeting that none of us want to be at. So essentially it's using this
Hopefully it's not this one.
not this one. So essentially introducing social media to the development work that we do.
Wonderful. Round of applause. Quickly, oh, there. All right, volunteers. Who is going to present?
Thank you. I am Jairo Matallana from UNDP Colombia. We had quite a bunch of ideas, but we finally decided to put forward the idea of tapping on the capacities and expertise of these guys of forensic architecture to advance the goals of searching missing persons in Colombia. A little bit of a context, we have a peace agreement signed in 2016 after a very long conflict in Colombia. We calculate 8 million people victims of the conflict. And one of the key and perhaps most horrible crimes during the conflict was enforced disappearance. There are about 86,000 people that were victims of this crime in Colombia. And that's more or less, just to give you an idea, it's double the figures of Argentina and Chile combined during the dictatorship. So that's a substantial number. And what we have so far is supported both the unit for search of missing persons, so that's an institution created as part of the transitional justice arrangements, and platforms of organizations from victims associations, human rights organizations that have supported the search of missing persons. We have come to a point where we have the unit functional. Many organizations have documented cases and traced a little bit the different stories, but now we need to advance two things in particular. One is to better define the roots of disappearance. That is, create really different paths of where people were originally taken from, then the transit regions, and the last seen point. We have already found some of these pathways of disappearance, but still we have a lot to do in that front, and we believe like combining different techniques that were here presented could advance our goals on that front, always in partnership with social organizations. And the second idea is to use, let's say, these techniques we have so far decided that, perhaps I won't go into the details of this second one, but what
I'm fine. They want to go for lunch.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. But in short, it's just to use these to use these techniques to foster or to improve the search of missing persons in remote areas, in particular rivers and other bodies of water where it is very difficult to search. So it might entail to not only to use science and forensics, but also engineering to really improve these search techniques.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you had people around the table who could help with some ideas, yeah? Great. Who's presenting here?
Last one?
No, there's one more group.
Okay, I will try to be really short, really short. I'm Anton and from Ukraine, and surprise, surprise, my example will be about Ukraine. I can show you a map actually. So, if you know, there is a conflict in Ukraine, and the territories of two regions in Ukraine are divided, right? And unfortunately, the administrative centers of these regions remained on the one side of the continent, which we call non-government control area. So, in government control area, like there are basically no big cities, right? And the people living in this like red zone, if you can see it in the red. Actually, we call it the gray zone. And the people in the gray zone, they're the most vulnerable. They have basically nothing, no hospitals, no schools, no administrative service centers, and so on. But they still need to receive health services, education services, and administrative services. So what we are going to understand is how the traditional transportation patterns and networks change since the conflict. For example, people living in this red area. People living here, where they're going to receive, for example, health services in this city, on that city, or we don't know. If we will understand this, we will be able to provide more targeted support, for example, to hospitals or to schools. And we will be able to get this data from mobile service operators using their geo-localized data points, and also by analyzing the social networks and reviews about the hospitals. For example, if people are writing that there are so many non-local people in our hospitals, then we will know that people from the gray zone are coming to these facilities more often. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And last, but certainly not least, who is going to present here?
Hi, I'm Elgün. I will not tell my organization because you will easily identify it after one sentence. First of all, just we did some stakeholder analysis, and we've identified that in our table we have government, we have private sector, and we have civil society. And guess which organization had to speak on their behalf? So actually, we identified that actually what business needs to sell goods, to get money, what government is interested in stability, what people are interested in better life, and what unites all this, social cohesion. So social cohesion is in the middle of our triangle. And then we came up with the question. We discussed the interesting presentations today and identified how we can link this big data, for instance, some of us are not experienced in working, to small data that we are quite, some of us are quite, particularly older generation are quite easy dealing with. Each of them have advantages and disadvantages because, yes, big data is somehow virtual reality, but it presents what is in reality, while small data is somehow more representative and easy to analyze. And then we identified that there should be some legitimacy in data, particularly it was a suggestion from the government side, definitely, that there should be some standards for data, and we need to identify how we can use this data collected for development needs. Then we actually came idea that actually what we are discussing is co-designing, and it's already happening around the globe in different countries. But maybe there can be some co-data lab, which is somehow like a chain, global chain of such different co-designing laboratories existing in the world. Because big data definitely in 10, 15 years will be not big data, probably there will be something else. But what we can use this big data is not only measuring and for early warning purposes, for monitoring purposes, etc., but by using this big data, we can innovate. We can apply different programs, policies, which is actually leading to sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I want to recognize two things and say a couple more. One is, in fact, this kind of exercise, though it feels rushed, I know, because we're definitely over time, it's actually the heart at IID. And I think this is what makes Innovation Days different from from a lot of other events we run, because it's really about applying what we're hearing. And I know it feels rushed, and I'm fully aware of it and contributing to it, but I think it's really important we take the time, even if it's short, to try to think through how what we're hearing applies to what we do. The other thing I wanted to say, I think what comes across from a lot of what I heard is that what is needed is to build truthfulness in everything that we do. That there's massive potential in applying horizon technologies, obviously, in augmenting our understanding and what we do in real life, and that we need to bridge gaps, whether it's between the different data sources or whether it's between our perceptions and experiences, but that we need to bridge the gap so we get a fuller understanding, make better sense of the environments where we operate. I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan for a quick reflection and maybe just say, I think the next session starts at 3.
Okay, so that's an extra stimulus for me to be quick. And I'm not going to try and summarize everything that's been said because I think it's been far too rich a discussion for that. But just 4 quick points. The first one is to reiterate what Leila said. I think that the nature of brainstorming like this, to use an old term, is that it generates a lot of issues. And I think we've covered quite a spectrum of issues at each table, from issues around citizen participation, social media, alternative narratives, questions around social service delivery, ceasefire monitoring, researching enforced displacement, enforced disappearances in conflict situations. So trying to apply some of the ideas that we heard outlined has given you avenues into an awful lot of different conversations. And I think one of the key dimensions of that, which was really important, I think, from the 2 presentations, was the importance of recognizing that you have to apply multiple sources of analysis to your problem solving if you're going to do things differently. And I think what we all recognize is that we do need to do things differently. But at the same time, we're trying to navigate a world of excess information. And I think that's something we're going to have to continuously grapple with. How do we process the information that's out there, but how do we use it to hold power to account? And that, to me, seems to be at the heart of good governance. And perhaps then to finish with an old-fashioned notion, which is that the process of holding power to account, the process of using the data that is at your fingertips, is that you need to be prepared to ask uncomfortable and unusual questions in your designing what it is that you're doing. And I think that is what equips you to do your work better. So I'd like to end by thanking Bob and Paula and Julie, who's long gone, but hopefully fast asleep on the other side of the world, for giving us such stimulating presentations. And I hope that what you saw will linger in your minds as you go off to have lunch. So thanks ever so much.
Maybe just a logistical detail. We'll reconvene in the plenary shortly after lunch. Lunch will be served at the plenary, close to the plenary. I think people are hungry.